bigger and our handwriting is bigger, these will be much easier, less convenient for you guys that are going around in the field. But we print these by the thousands, so anybody's welcome to come into our office at any time and get a tablet of 50 of them and go on a registration drive and bring them back. I would tell you that if you do want to go on a registration drive, that everything on the form has to be filled out. So when we register a voter, we either need their Montana driver's license number or the last four of their social security. And that combined with their date of birth and their name is either routed through the Department of Justice for identification or through the Social Security Administration for identification. And that's how we verify the voters that come in that we actually put on our official registration rolls. So I'll start with my least favorite of everything that got passed. It was House Bill 176. So years back, we in Montana had same-day voter registration. We had the most progressive election laws in the United States. The only time we were closed was from noon to 5 on the Monday before Election Day, and that was simply so that the election departments across the state could get all of our polls set up in that time period and not deal with, voters coming in. And then we reopened the late registration process on election morning at 7 a.m. and that ran clear through until 8 o'clock, or the last person in line in the facility when 8 o'clock came upon us. That was always a very, very busy process. So we had a legislator, Sharon Grief, that introduced House Bill 176, and that was going to turn late registration back to Friday at 5 o'clock. As that bill went through the process, that was amended to Monday at noon. So from now on, and what really made this difficult was that when the governor signed this bill on April 19th, 2021, it was effective immediately. And what that cost the clerks across the state was that we had already done all of our advertising for the school election and special districts, and we had to re-advertise for all of that because all of our mail ballot plans and everything had the close of registration at 8 p.m. on election day. So that was kind of expensive to, and considering it was only 2.5 weeks away from school election, we all kind of felt that perhaps it could have at least waited until May 5th rather than April 19th. At any rate, from now on, at noon on the Monday before Election Day is the final time that you will be able to come in and register to vote as a new registrant. The conversation that they had during the legislative process was that they were helping out the clerks, that this would make our jobs easier on Election Day. And when they reached out to our association, we told them over and over again that this is not something that we wanted. You can't keep moving the target for people. So against our wishes, this was passed, and late registration will now close at noon on the Monday before Election Day. This is also has action taken in court. I don't know if you guys will remember, but several years back, they put this on the ballot in a primary election as a legislative referendum to try to get this stopped. It was voted on overwhelmingly by the people in the state of Montana to continue to have late registration, and this legislature chose to override the will of the people. So we weren't very happy about that as administrators in whole. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Rina, what does something like that cost? Because as citizens of Montana, of course, we're paying for any adjustments and so forth that occur. Is that a costly thing to do, to change all these?
Well, it was several hundred in advertising for all schools across the state, when we had to do it immediately. And now it's just going to be voter education and outreach so that people don't think that they can come in on Election Day. So, yes?
I think I heard you say it affects new registrants only, given that we had, 85–90% franchise in the last election. It sounds like everyone, or is it true that everyone who voted in 2020 is good?
Yes.
2022?
Yeah, we don't want anybody to think that if they're already registered that this affects them. This is the new people that, and there were a lot of them in the 2020 election that waited until election day.
Is the remote voting still available on the registration form?
The absentee ballots?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, oh, I should put the caveat on that. The only people that this doesn't pertain to is overseas citizens and the military. So my military people and anybody living overseas can still vote through the digital process, and they can register clear up until 8 p.m. and cast the digital ballot on election day.
Okay, so, let me see. So then, when is what is the cutoff?
Noon the day before an election.
So Monday by noon, the person has to, if they're not registered to vote, they've got to register by noon on that Monday.
That is
before.
correct, yeah. And then at that point, we issue the ballot because we're in late registration. And then so on election day, the option, like if you made a mistake on your ballot, you can still come in and get that fixed. But if you forgot to register, if you moved into the county and didn't get that taken care of, or into the state and didn't get that taken care of, you had to have been there before noon.
All right, so somebody that just forgets or whatever, and then they go in and they think they can maybe register in the afternoon on Monday, they're out of luck.
Oh yeah, that's that correct, yeah. We always have that certain few that come in afternoon anyway, because that noon to 5 is when we're closed, and somebody's always not happy on Monday. So now there's gonna be more than one person not happy on Monday.
Okay.
Refer to my list here.
Rena, I've had someone ask for you to repeat the questions that people
Oh,
are
okay.
doing because they can't hear it on Zoom.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there was a bill, HB 506, that was passed that's going to generally revise our election laws. And this bill also discusses the whole redistricting process. And in this bill, this wasn't really a bad one because this actually says that it has to be, the district boundaries must coincide with boundaries of political subdivisions of the state. To the greatest extent possible, the number of counties and cities divided among more than one district must be as small as possible. And then when there is a choice between dividing local political subdivisions, the more populous subdivisions must be divided before the less populous subdivisions need to be divided. So for us, when they redistrict for us, that's probably going to be precinct 30. So precinct 30 in Cascade County is it's Cascade County, Ponderay, Teton, and then it goes clear up to Hale County. But it's mostly Havre. So our people that are just on the other, on Eagles Crossing, those guys are all in that 30. And so whatever they're gonna vote on as far as representation is more than likely gonna be decided by Hill County, because that's where the populace is. So this kind of straightened that around. So that was a good one, actually.
Would you clarify that a little bit? Are you saying that a voting district goes from Great Falls to Havre?
Yes, our precinct 30 does. It's in 4 different counties. And that's like that in many places across the state, but now because of the census, we're going to be in the redistricting process yet again.
Where it goes down a little bit?
Yeah, and we've got, another legislature that we're gonna be able to have, and so a group will get together, Democrat, Republican, part of the legislature, and then they're gonna redo all the boundaries across the state of Montana. And then we will go into our elections programs and we will move all those addresses into the new precincts that we have and go from there. But this law basically says that this has to be a little more equitable for the people in the smaller areas. Yes.
Just a point of clarification, the redistricting commission can have no legislators on it.
Okay.
They're the ones that determine the new districts, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and a neutral chairman. But the legislature is trying to make it so that the legislature has oversight for that commission, because they want to make the decisions. And I don't know if that bill went through or if that could still be something that happens as an executive order or whatever, but right now the redistricting commission is a pretty fair way to do it. although party politics are at play, but gee, many Christmas, our constitutional writers did not want the legislature making those districts.
No, you can remember years ago, so we redistrict every 10 years. So before that, we actually had, like, Black Eagle and Riverview was a district. The lower north side and the lower south side, that was also a precinct. And now you have a precinct that runs from the river to 58th Street and 4 blocks on each side of 10th Avenue South. That is not like, those people are not alike that live down on the lower north and south side versus the ones that live on the east end of town. And it's supposed, we have a representative form of government, and the people that we're choosing to represent it are supposed to be, our neighborhood. And so we're hoping that our boundaries are gonna be a little more equitable this time.
But the legislature will approve or not approve the
Mhm.
redistricting plan, so they can still try to muck up the process if they want to.
It is actually quite a nightmare. In our program that we have, Montana Votes, all of those address lines have to be moved by hand. So we actually sit down with maps and we'll say from 1st Avenue North to 2nd Avenue North on the odd side of the street, we'll move into precinct 21B, and then from on the even side of the street, they might be in 21A, and it's a long process to actually move everything. Okay, the next bill is an act generally revising ballot initiatives. So this is an interim committee process that would have to take place prior to the approval to pass around a petition to get an issue on the ballot. What this basically is going to do is add 14 days to the process. So a committee at the legislature needs to look over what they intend to pass the petition around, and then once it gets approved, then you can circulate a petition. This is actually an improvement over what they originally wanted to do, because originally what came across was that the legislature wanted to approve any petition, even if you'd gathered the signatures, they wanted the approval before it actually went on a ballot, which means that they could have not approved it to go on the ballot, and that's kind of not the way our process works. Does anybody have any questions about, yes?
Is there any way to tell whether or not the marijuana initiative would have made it onto the ballot in this system?
In this system, boy, I couldn't tell you that. I know that, we've of course gone back and forth with them about whether it's going to be approved or not. And to begin with, they were going to put it off a while, and now they've come up with, if your county or city passed it, then your county is going to be good to go. If a city passed it and a county didn't, it's still legal in the city. But we've got some counties out in the eastern Montana that did not pass it. And then they have the option to go back to putting that on the ballot to see if they can get their people to pass it. So it could be a county by county issue in the state of Montana, even though the majority of the people across the state voted to approve it. But they're going to let those counties that held out, not make it legal in those areas.
What prompted that bill?
Repeat the question.
What prompted this bill? Probably things like the marijuana bill, I would guess. I mean, I honestly can't tell you what the thought process was for a lot of the issues that came before this legislative session. All I know is that day after day it was. Okay, so here's a good one. This one was a good one that passed. This is a bill enacted. Oh, sorry.
Are these bills being challenged, or is it?
So the same-day registration is being challenged, and the Voter ID Act is being challenged. The rest of them were not challenged. As an association, we have a big part over there during the legislative sessions, and sometimes you have to pick your fights as to exactly how far you want to push, because as an association, 70% of us are elected Republican clerks, but when you'd ever go to one of our meetings, you would never know who was who, because basically we're there to run free and fair elections. And so all we want passed is things that will benefit the voters. and make it easier for the voters. It doesn't matter what it takes us, it's just to make the process good. And for me, to make the process good is to make it standard and not to keep changing the goal line, because that's confusing for our voters. So this was a bill that came out of the SABA committee, and that's the State Administration and Veterans Affairs Committee. And this is to actually bring school district elections that they will have to provide accommodations for handicapped voters. So when we run an election under Title 13, we have to program our auto marks or express votes, which are pieces of equipment that allow our handicapped voters to, they can use a sip and puff, it's got braille on it, or they've got headphones that they can hear the ballot, and then they vote on a screen. And all these machines are just big giant pencils. They mark the ovals, they kick the ballot out, and they hand it into the ballot box just like anyone else. The school districts, on the other hand, have never had to follow those rules because they're under Title 20. But now the school districts will have to accommodate our disabled voters, and by doing that, that means that we will, the elections administrators will be providing them with either an auto mark or an express vote if we're not running their election. So in this county, the only two elections that we don't run are Cascade and Belt. And so Cascade and Belt will have to come in and get auto marks from us or express votes. And then they're actually gonna have to set their elections up through the portal, through election system and software, because now they have to program their elections. They're not gonna be able to print their own ballots anymore. So in the smaller districts, as you know, they just print a ballot and just have the boxes. And we've done that in some of our smaller district elections, but because of that, they can't do that anymore, because that election has to be programmed, and the programming has to go into those auto marks and express votes, because once a person wants to use one of those, they have to be able to feed that ballot into it. So all ballots will have to be the same in those elections, and so they'll have to print on ballot stock too. So a little more expense for those guys, but a good thing, it's a win for the handicapped population. Although I have to tell you, we don't have very many people that use the express vote or auto mark machines. We haven't implemented the express votes in Cascade County yet. We still use auto marks. One second. So the auto mark actually votes on a standard ballot. The express vote is gonna vote on it's a 3-inch wide thermal paper, and it'll say the candidate's name that you voted on, but our count machine will actually read a barcode across the top. Lynn and I aren't 100% comfortable with that yet, and it's been proven to work, but we're still with our old antiquated 75-pound auto marks. We haul those around yet, and maybe next year we'll decide to jump off like the rest of the clerks did and issue put the express votes out there.
I just have a question. When your district does all mail-in, will that still apply?
Yes, you have to provide an auto mark or an express vote handicap voting piece of equipment, even if it's a mail ballot, and because you have to give those voters the opportunity to use that machine. So we have 6 individuals that use the equipment, and they just bring their ballots that we mail to them right into the office, and then they sit in our office and vote their ballot, and then we help them, put it in the envelope and help them to sign it, and and then it goes in for the count, just like everyone else's. Yes?
So you say that not a lot of people use this equipment, but my question is, how much have you told people that this equipment is available? Do they know that this is something they can use, or do they go, it's too hard to vote, why bother?
Okay, so the question is, how many, have we done any public outreach, pretty much?
Do they know?
So every time we run an election, our display ad in the paper actually talks about the machines and their abilities. When I was very first elected, I was frustrated because the machines were $5,000 each, they weigh 75 pounds, we had 38 precincts, we had to haul these things around. It takes forever because you have to run every ballot through every machine that are test ballots to make sure they're counting correctly. So we went to the mall with them, we went to the senior centers, and try to get people interested. And I'm gonna tell you, the Great Falls Senior Center, as soon as bingo started, nobody wanted to listen to us anymore. So it was really hurtful, I have to say. So we have tried, but, and then Shyla Patera, that's one of the advocates here, you know, she doesn't even vote on those. I give her a bad time, but she won't even vote on the express vote. Like I said, we have 6 people that come in to vote on those and within our office. All right, so here we're gonna go with the amended ID issue. So normally in the state of Montana, you could have used anything as a form of ID when you came in to cast your ballot. So let's see, and these are for poll voters, because the 90% of us that vote by mail don't have these qualifications, because we actually look at every one of your signatures. But when you come in on election day, and you either could give us your voter confirmation card as your ID, a Montana driver's license, and if you didn't have any of those, the standard forms of identification, you could use a fishing license, you could use your car title, and the caveat to that was that the address on the other piece of paper that you brought in had to match what you were registered in within our system. You know, so kind of just verifying that you didn't come in and say, oh, I live at 213th Street North, but my bill is actually at 3170 Walter Drive. So we've cleaned up some of the voter ID, and so what can be used right now is the Montana driver's license, a Montana ID, a military ID card, a tribal photo, a US passport. Cannot use, or a Montana concealed carry permit. Very important, people. Very important. So what they've gotten rid of, if you don't have any of that information, then you have to bring in 2 other forms of information. So you would have to bring in a utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, government check, or any other document that shows the individual's name and current address, but you have to bring 2 of them. So on election day, this is the people that vote at the polls that this will impact. And I can tell you probably 50% of my people always went with the voter confirmation card. The strange part about this little law is that it costs a lot of money to print the voter confirmation card. So every time you change your address, we send you a voter confirmation card in the mail. They didn't say we didn't have to do that anymore, but you can't use it as a form of ID. So we still are having to mail all those out. Jerry?
Rita, can a student use their student ID?
That was an amendment laid on in the bill, and no.
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, sorry. Can a student use a student ID? That bill, that portion of the bill, the Secretary of State's office asked for the amendment and went with no college ID. That came right from our Secretary of State's office. So when you've got your college kids out there and you can't use a college ID anymore or your high school ID. So it's kind of, the other day, we had a high school girl come in, and so she had her school ID because she didn't have a Montana ID yet, but you know, she lived at home, so I'm guessing she doesn't have a utility bill, probably didn't have a bank statement, doesn't have a job, you know, so that would kind of disclude her until she got some, you know, her Montana ID. So that was kind of a bad deal, and this was basically targeted Missoula and Bozeman, is what that targeted, so to not let those college kids in without the proper
It's
identification.
targeted to keep people who might vote for Democrats from being able to vote, that's what it was. That was as clear as could be. But, so what is someone supposed to do then if they have a student, let's say they're a college student? Okay, they're not gonna have a utility bill if they live on campus. I mean, if they live in, you know, housing, what do they do?
Yep, the form of ID is a Montana driver's license, a
Yeah.
Montana state ID, military ID, tribal photo ID, United States passport, or a Montana concealed and carry permit. And so if they don't have one of those, then they need to provide 2 of the other form of ID, so if they were actually wanting to register, say, from Arizona, and they wanted to become part of our political process because they're here in Montana, and you only have to be here for 30 days to be considered a Montana resident once you register to vote, if they gave us their Arizona ID, then they would have to come up with one of these other forms. And they need to have that with them, or they need to come back and visit us
So a
again.
student that is going to college here, going to one of the universities, wants to vote here, but they have, say, they're from Arizona and they've got an Arizona driver's license, they wouldn't be allowed to vote then. Whereas, say, somebody in the military might have a military ID, and they might have, I've seen it, where they'll have like out-of-state driver's licenses, but they can vote, but the college student can't. And it was basically the same situation.
That would be true, yes.
Hey, Rina, did you or any of the other county officials across Montana report a significant amount of fraud based on people using college IDs?
There's been no fraud reported in the state of Montana. I can tell you that by the end of an election cycle, I have to say our eyes hurt, we're tired and crabby. Every ballot that comes in, everyone, we scan the barcode and we look at every single signature that comes in. And there's 3 or 4 of us in the office that do that. We do not bring temps in Cascade County. We do that with the people that have been doing this for a long time. And then if we have a signature that we don't think matches, then then we consult, and 2 or 3 of us actually initial that envelope. And then there's a letter that goes to the voter that says, we're not saying it wasn't your signature. We're just saying it doesn't match what we have in our system, so could you please fill out this form, provide a copy of your ID, and then we can attach that form and actually scan that in as a new signature. So what we're seeing statistically across the United States where the signatures aren't matching is young people. Number one, nobody takes cursive in school anymore, so there's not really a signature. And your signature changes from the time you're in high school to college to, and then we also see that in the aging population. We can tell when our voters have had a stroke or have had some kind of a health issue. You can see the signatures change, and then they get a letter from us that just says, could you please sign the form so that we can scan this into our system so that we have an updated signature that we can use.
Hey, Rina.
Yeah.
Can you just confirm for me, did you say you cannot use your voter registration card as ID now?
You cannot use the voter confirmation card anymore. So the question was, just to verify, you cannot use your voter confirmation card anymore. We're gonna send it to you, and I guess you just pitch it in the garbage because I know you're registered, you know you're registered, your name's gonna be in our registers, but you can't use it for ID, so.
So basically, there's gonna have to be some kind of an outreach then by the candidates to, say, college students. Otherwise, a lot of them are just gonna find out too late that they wouldn't be able to vote.
So he's saying that some outreach for college students. That would be true if they wait until the late registration process, or if they show up at the polls on election day. They get in there and get registered. So you can, prior to an election where we take registration cards through the mail, if it's in regular registration, again, all we need is their last 4 of their social security number if they don't have a Montana ID, along with their date of birth and their name, and then we can verify them as a voter, and then they would get a ballot through the mail, which we would then verify their signature to make sure that they're the ones that sent us the ballot. So it's affecting the people that go to the polls.
Okay.
I had a question about change of address. Or if they come in and their address is not the same as what's on the rolls, are they gonna get the vote?
If they're using
Can they
these,
change it then?
if they're using these alternative forms of ID, not on election day. So they could change their registration, they could do a new registration card before election day and up until noon.
So we were able to give them a change of address card and let it go. But you're telling me now they can't do that?
Not, if they bring in an alternative form of ID, the address has to match what we have in the registers.
Yeah, and that is.
Twice.
I don't, we must have had, how many do we have? I know that my precinct had about 5 of them. I'm from Ponderay County, and, I know that my precinct had at least 5 change of addresses. That we were allowed to give them a change of address card, change the address, we'd send it up to the courthouse, say change the address, but we were allowed to let them vote.
Yeah, so the only caveat here is if they don't have their Montana ID or one of the photo IDs that are prescribed in this new legislation, then they have to provide the other 2, and if the address doesn't match on like their paycheck or whatever with how they were registered, then you can't issue them a ballot
So they
anymore.
can they do a provisional?
They could do a provisional, it wouldn't be counted.
Until they could prove it.
Until they could bring us, yeah, and they would have until,
24 hours, don't they?
they have until
24
3
hours.
o'clock the next day to
Okay.
provide the ID.
Okay.
And then, like I say, that's 2 forms,
Yeah, yeah,
so.
but they could do a provisional,
Mhm.
and then, so they could still vote, only a provisional vote. don't
Yes, so she's asking if they could still vote provisionally, and yes, everybody can vote provisionally.
they? Let's hope they're all Republicans.
So, oh goodness.
Rina, I have a question. Is there any breakdown of, first of all, what percentage are voting early by mail versus showing up at the polls? And does that break down by any demographic you know of? Like, are young people tending to vote later day of, or?
So she's asking, kind of like the statistics of when ballots come in, for people that are voting by mail versus voting at the polls. So 90% of our voters vote by mail.
Okay.
We used to see 2,500 ballots, and it was just almost right on the money. 2,500 ballots came in on election day. And then we had the Gianforte issue with the reporter, and we had all kinds of people that had voted and turned their ballot in that wanted their ballot back, which under Montana law, once you put the ballot in the ballot box, that is a voted ballot and you can't have it back. So since that incident, we get about 5,000 ballots back on election day that we mailed 25 days before, which really was shocking to begin with, because you think you've got all your work done ahead of time, and then election day was just, fixing, reissuing ballots that people had made mistakes on or whatnot. And now it's actually going through the whole separating by precinct, scanning the barcodes, verifying the signatures, so the back end of our process, we had to have more manpower than we'd ever had before. So that process changed, and the first time it did it was like shocking. We were really late trying to get everything counted because it wasn't a process we were prepared for, because historically it had been 2,500 ballots.
Right.
So, yes.
I got 2 questions. Like one, I love government overspending, but if we can't use the voter confirmation cards, how much money are we wasting by sending those out?
So she's asking if we can't use the voter confirmation cards, how much money are we spending by sending them out? It's a matter of law. It actually says in law that we have to send them, but for every one of those that go out, we pay the postage, and that's where it's. And then many of them come back, because that's not something that we can send out with our nonprofit mailing with those. So depends like how many we have to actually issue per year. Next year is going to be huge, because next year when we redistrict, every voter in the state of Montana will get a new card, because it'll have a new precinct on it.
So a fun amount.
Yeah. Yeah, our postage bill last year was upwards of $140,000. Yeah, in Cascade County alone.
My second question was, because last time I checked my passport and my military ID don't have my address on it. So how come I can use that, but I can't use my voter confirmation card or my student ID, which may have an address or at least a general location where I'm at?
Did everybody hear her? She's asking why she can use a passport or a military ID that do not have her picture, but she couldn't use a college ID that does have a picture.
Address.
Oh, it was the address. And, boy, I don't have an answer for that.
Better ask the legislature.
Yeah, that would be a legislative issue. I don't like it when they bring you the military ID, because then I always have to ask for their date of birth and everything anyway, because it's not on there and it's not as convenient as looking at a driver's license, but that's okay. And then I always get, I get flustered when I'm trying to find information, and because of the blue background, it's hard to read the name and everything else. So we accept them. I prefer the clearer one.
Rina, clarify for me. I come from Minnesota to be an officer in Air Force Base. I'm here for 60 days. I'm a Minnesota resident. Can I vote in the state of Montana?
Okay, so we have a lot of our military people that come in and ask that. And after 30 days, if they're here 30 days prior to the election, they can. But once they sign that registration card, they become a citizen of Montana. And they are subjected to our license plates taxes and our property taxes and everything else. So we always kind of tell them that that's what's going to happen before they do it. And some of them choose to actually register in Montana, and some of them will say, oh, well, in Washington, my license plates are only $10. We'll just go there.
Don't vote in 2 states, you'll go to jail.
Huh?
Don't vote in 2 states.
That's
You're
right.
only for 60 days, don't vote in 2 states.
But I'm a student. I come from Minnesota. I'm here for 60 days. I cannot vote.
As long as you're in Montana for 30 days prior to the election, those are the laws in the state of Montana. And it says right on the voter registration card, right across the top, which I always point out to people, this is a federal document. And the question is, are you a United States citizen? Will you be at least 18 years of age on or before the next election? And will you be in Montana for at least 30 days before the next election? So when they sign this form, they're attesting to the fact that this information is all true.
The difference between a student and somebody working at Malmstrom Air Force Base is a student can't use a student ID.
Right.
But he could use a Minnesota driver's license.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, a student cannot use a student ID to verify, as a form of vote identification when they come to the polls anymore.
Rina, what happened to tribal ID?
The what?
The tribal ID?
Oh, that actually got in there.
Okay.
Yeah, you can use the tribal ID. That would, and this, like you say, this again there's a court action against this.
Against the tribal ID?
No, against the whole bill that negates
Yeah.
being able to use the other forms of ID.
Right.
Yeah. Especially, I'm assuming the college kids, so. All right, if anybody else doesn't have any questions on that one, then we'll move on to, this is kind of a simple one. This is an act requiring annual voter registration list maintenance. So currently, or previously, every other year, we had to send our whole entire voter database information through the NCOA, which is the National Change of Address system, to see if we've got people that moved that maybe didn't tell us, and then we reach out to those people to try to get new registration cards from them, get them registered. We babysit people year-round, I'm telling you. So this bill has asked us to do that every year. So it's not really a big deal to do it every year, but when we run mail ballot elections, which the majority of the counties do on the odd years, those, like the school elections, most of us run mail ballot, the city election is a mail ballot, and we run those because we work for those different agencies. So we're basically hired to run the election for them. So Brian they've actually got the school clerks are the elections administrators in the school districts. And then the school have to send us a letter before June 30th of every year to ask us to run the next election for them. And so then that's when we take over. So then when we do a mail ballot election and any ballots come back as undeliverable, we have to send a letter to that voter that's forwardable, because remember, most things, a ballot is never forwardable. So if the ballot comes back, then they immediately get a letter that says your ballot came back to us. Have you moved? Because we can we can send the ballot to the address, but then they have to register with us to move into their new precinct. And so then if we don't hear back from them in 30 days, we send another letter to them. And then once the second letter doesn't come back, then we go in and we inactivate the voter. We don't cancel them, they're still in our system, but we've just inactivated them, which assures us that we're not mailing them a ballot in the next election to an address that has already sent it back as being undeliverable. So this is kind of redundant to be doing this every year, because on the odd years, we'll already have done it 2 or 3 times, depending on how many elections we've run by mail on those years. So let's see.
So when they,
Does that cost a lot of money or?
Oh yeah, like say our postage was way over the $100,000 mark last year, and this.
The NCOA, the change of address?
No, that doesn't cost, no, that's just time.
Yeah.
So, and then we mail out all of our ballots nonprofit, so our ballots go out at 11 cents each. When they come back as undeliverable, they come back at $1.49. So it's lots and lots and lots of money. And then again, then you reach out with a letter, and then you reach out with another letter, and then you finally say, okay, they didn't respond twice, so now we're gonna inactivate them. And if they want a ballot the next time, they need to come in and fix things with us. Yes?
so when they talk about purging voter rolls in some states, that's not an attempt to do that in Montana, is it?
No. So in all the years that I've been here, the voter rolls have been purged only one time, and that was under Linda McCullough. And so what happened in that process is we were told to run our cancel. So once you've missed 2 federal general elections, then you go into a canceled status. And that means like if we run all of our reporting, you actually would have to ask for those canceled voters to be included in the data. They just kind of sit over here and they're not going to get a ballot. You know, they've probably long gone. So after they've missed 2 federal general cycles, and then they go to the canceled status, and then once they miss another 2 federal generals, then the Secretary of State's office can purge the rolls of all the canceled voters. Otherwise, you got this whole list of people that haven't voted for 16, 20 years that are, or died, that are canceled. But before we do that, then we were told that, we have to print the register of all the canceled voters that we had, and then that's in our vault as a permanently retained document, so we can always go back to, these were the voters that were canceled in 2010. Yes?
What do you do for people that pass away?
So,
Repeat the question.
what do we do for people that pass away? So monthly, we get a list from the Department of Public Health and Human Services in Helena, and we go through that list and we remove voters from the rolls. We cancel them as deceased voters. In Cascade County, and I'm sure in a lot of the other counties, because the worst thing that can happen is if a spouse comes in, and honestly, that we had a lady this last election that her husband had died the day before, and she's standing there with his ballot crying, and it's just like, oh my God. So because we also run the vital statistics part, the birth and death certificates, we actually pull the death list up to the minute we send the ballots to IPS. And so we can't help anything from when they go to our mail carrier to the date of the election, but up to the 10 o'clock in the morning, the day we send the ballots out, we pull the current list and we cancel voters, and actually pull those ballots and put them in a canceled voter file so that we don't send those out. But those lists are monitored all the time in these election offices across the state of Montana.
So again, there's been no voter fraud and no dead people voting?
No dead people, no voter fraud, no. And like see, even in a signature mismatch, doesn't mean that somebody else filled your ballot out. That means that, I'm sure there's an outside chance that somebody could decide to fill in their kid's ballot when they were away at college, but as a general rule, it's the signature has changed, and then we gather the information and add it back into our system. So some people might have 10 or 15 different signatures in our system. I registered one time a long time ago, I've got one. So I actually have to consciously think about how I'm gonna sign when I sign my ballot, because my signature is way different than what it was. You can actually read it one way a long time ago. Now it's like a big old symbol that I like to. Yes.
So, let's say somebody's voting by mail, and they vote, and then they die like a week later. Does their, maybe I missed something, does their ballot count, or?
Yes, so the question is, what if somebody votes their ballot and dies before the election? So once the ballot is received in our office, that is a voted ballot. And so whether they passed away after the fact that they turned it in, that ballot is still going to count in the elections in Montana.
Like that woman who brought the ballot.
Turn them in early.
She passed the president's ballot.
Oh no, he had actually died.
That's what I would do.
She got his ballot in the mail. He died like after we mailed them out, and she just brought them to us, and so. Then we write a big void across them, and. No, he did not, no. So this next law, this kind of changed, we only have one polling place that this affected. So in the state of Montana years ago, if you have less than 400 registered voters at a precinct, like we had Centerville, you didn't have to open that poll until noon. And so this law cleaned up that language, and this one says, if you have less than 400 voters minus your absentee voters, you know, because you might have 800 voters in a precinct, but say 56% of them vote by mail, and it takes it under the 400 threshold, then you can open your poll, your precinct at noon. We had the one in Centerville, we never did that. We've always just maintained the 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. hours at our polling places. Any questions about that one? That was a very simple one. Okay.
There's a lot of them.
Okay, so this is another one that the elections administrators across the state actually lobbied very heavily for. So with all of the more people voting, years back we asked, we need extra time. We need more time. If you want election results by Tuesday night or Wednesday, we need more time on this end because you don't want to give us time on this end. So the legislature passed that we could do early counting. So right now we can open, our election judges come in on Thursday and Friday. They open the ballots under all of our video surveillance, and then those ballots are flattened out, put in boxes, counted, the number of pages is written on the outside, those boxes are sealed, and then they sit under our cameras until we move the ballots on Monday to over at the fairgrounds. So when we move our ballots, because I'm paranoid, we actually have the sheriff's department comes, and we have a lead car and a car that follows us, and then they have their dash cams on from the minute we start moving the ballots from inside our office into our van, and then they follow us across the river until we've locked everything inside the exhibition hall. So when they're asking about ballot chain of custody, I've got the proof, because I'm not, yeah, you get a little nervous. So with that law, you had to have more than one count machine in order to start counting the ballots on the Monday before election. And some of the small counties, even we only had one count machine up until 2 years ago. And we were able to purchase a second count machine. So the law said that you had to test at least 50% of your equipment on election morning. Well, if you've run ballots through your count machine, you can't test that piece of equipment because you just continue to add to the number in the machine. So you can't zero it out and then say, well, yesterday we had this many, because that number is accumulative. And so the counties that only had one machine weren't allowed to early count, even though some of them needed the early process, but couldn't necessarily afford another $110,000 piece of equipment. So this law actually changed that, and so we will do all of our testing and zeroing our machines on Monday, and then we can use both machines on Monday, we can use both machines on Tuesday. Yellowstone County can use all 3 of their machines. Lewis and Clark County uses 3 machines, but in the counties that are smaller, that only have 1 piece of equipment, can also participate in the early count process. And so what the early count is we actually start running ballots through the equipment on Monday, and then those machines are locked into our area that has video surveillance on it constantly, and all the numbers are in the machine, and then you just reuse that machine the next day, and you add to those numbers. And on our count machines, there's a specific printer that sits underneath the machine that's an audit log. And from the minute the machine was put into action at Election System and Software down in Nebraska and shipped out, everything that has ever gone through that machine is traced on that audit log, and you can rerun those reports. So if anybody said, well, we saw you guys doing something after midnight on Monday, we can say, no, we didn't, and here's the audit log to prove that. And there was no duplicate because here's the audit log to prove that. So the machines are really, they're very good machines. We run DS850s in Cascade County, and like I said, we have 2 of them. So we have machines that cost as much as our motor graders that gravel, if you guys live out in the county that are fixing your roads. That's kind of everything that I have. I just want to update you on one issue with elections. This is something that the elections office, that the legislature was trying to take away. There was a private group, it was called the Center for Tech Life, that you could apply for a grant prior to this last November's election. And I've never applied for a grant before, but the gal from Lewis and Clark County says you should apply for this grant, everybody. And well, we applied for it, and it took me 3 minutes to fill it out. I had to upload my elections budget, and 3 days later, we were awarded $294,000. And so that was and you had to use the money for the safety and security of the election process, and it was kind of to help you through if you needed more equipment and whatnot. We didn't get the money until late October. So we could charge a lot of our PP&E equipment that we had to purchase, the extra man hours that we had to have to run our, COVID restricted election. We could charge the postage for the full mail ballot to this grant. And then we had a whole lot of money after the election was over that we couldn't use. So what we did is we are in the process of building a new elections office. And so we will go from the south end of our building to the north end. They've crafted bars for all of our windows. We've got a dozen video cameras we have video cameras in our office currently. There are more video cameras. There are cameras outside the building that will monitor people coming in. We've got 9 cameras in the hallways in the building. We've got security doors so that there are swipe cards so that I can tell exactly who has been in the office. We bought a new van. We had a van that was older, and we had to make multiple trips when we were putting things in storage, and we got one of the tall vans that we can all stand up in, and all of that went under this security grant, which didn't cost the taxpayers of Cascade County a penny. And we still, with all of that, and we bought letter opening machines, and we bought envelope sealing equipment. We bought a new folding machine. We bought a guillotine cutter. And so with all of that, we're still gonna turn back $35,000 on July 30th, because honestly, we couldn't spend enough money including like a big screen TV like that will sit in our office. So instead of Lynn having to write on the dry erase board now when the election dates are, we can actually have a live feed up there that changes, and this is what we're doing now. Now we're in late registration, and so it'll be a more professional looking office. Because we've lived in kind of a dump over the last 2 years, because once we lost our storage, it's all in elections, and so it's kind of a disaster zone. But we're very pleased with that, and some people think that if you take private money and a grant, that you're somehow beholden to the group. But I can tell you, none of us feel beholden. I was just happy that we have now one of the most secure offices in the state of Montana, and all we did was benefit from it. And I don't even honestly know who the group is that donates the money to the Center for Tech Life, but thank you.
Thank you, that's right.
Yes, question, now, there has been some more on the national level about concern, two things. One is like who does the final counting of ballots in counties or states? Is Montana affected by that at all?
Oh, you mean, they're trying to switch it to the Secretary of State's office.
So if they want to turn over anything, they can.
Yeah,
Is
no.
okay, and
No.
how about poll watching? Are those standards still apply that we've always used, that they have to, keep a certain distance and be outside?
Yeah, the poll watchers hurt my heart. So we had, I used to be a poll watcher when I was younger, and, you took the list, you listened for their name, you marked it off, because the idea was to get people to the polls, and if they needed a phone call on election day because they forgot, then you could call them. Now, kind of poll watchers are more to bird dogging, make sure you're not doing anything wrong, which, because election law is so complex, a lot of times things are, what they think are wrong aren't necessarily wrong, and then of course it ends up on Facebook that you're doing this, that, or the other thing, and so.
Well, and there was some talk that there was intimidation of voters.
We didn't see any of that in Cascade County.
But I mean, that isn't, those laws wouldn't affect you in terms of Montana.
No. Oh, I guess I should talk about the water thing that happened
water thing, yeah.
down in Georgia?
Yeah.
Georgia. Okay, so we actually went through that in Montana in 2012 because of Rina. So we had a group of attorneys and friends, and we had a very long line in 2012. And they came in, they went across the street, they brought the shopping carts over, and honestly, they gave cookies or chips or water to everybody in the facility, myself included, and my kidneys thanked them for that because we had been sitting at the late registration table for 15 hours at that point. And so, well, anyway, after it was all over, they insisted that they were in there campaigning for a specific candidate. I mean, seriously, if you've got 1,000 people standing in line, to target the people that were from the specific precinct that would have elected that specific person would have been challenging at the very least. So because of that, and then a 67-page complaint to political practices over me and letting them do that, because there's not a law or a county policy that said that I could, you can't stop anything unless you have either a law or a policy to back you. And so because they weren't campaigning, because they weren't doing anything about the election process, all they were doing was handing out the water. They did it, and then I had months of back and forth with political practices. And then Senator Steve Fitzpatrick introduced a bill in Montana in the next legislative session. And so we put an end to that way back in 2013. And it basically says that nobody can come in and give water or food to the voters or the people that are working there.
I read the law today and it says anything of monetary value. So water, is that considered monetary value then?
Well,
Even if it was just water, a water station that the county provides?
Oh, we can provide it, yes. Yes, and we will. Because I gotta tell you, it was in 20, and we had all of our, 18, and we had all of our voters, we put them in the back, in the garage for late registration. And it worked out really well, because in 2012, they snaked through all the tables, and people were trying to vote, and they were standing in line. It was a nightmare from the minute the doors opened. So we got this great idea that we would route them through the back, and they could stand in the garage. And you didn't see them, so that was, good for your mental health. You didn't see the 500 people standing in line. If they were standing there for 2 hours, well, they waited till election day, and we're working really hard here to accommodate you, but you did wait till election day. Well, finally, this guy comes up and he goes, I need to take them some water. And I said, well, you're not going to. Because I said, I'll take them some water, but you're not going to. Well, I walked back there and they had turned on the overhead radiant heaters. Like, it was probably 100. And I came running out and I'm like, oh my God, these people are gonna be well done before we get through the line. Turn the heaters off, we've gotta get them water. I mean, it was not a good situation, but they didn't complain. They were just, you know, a lot of sweat back there. In November, I might add. Well, then they turned the heat off and then the maintenance guys went home and then we were still working the next morning and literally freezing to death in there. But I suppose that was turnabout's fair play for what we had done to the voters unknowingly.
Is there anything that we can do to help the county with the water situation that would not consider monetary? If people decided to donate water and gave it to you, can we do that?
No.
To help out?
No, because I can guarantee that someone will say something. So it's not that big of an issue on our budget to add water to the list of, you know, and just put some.
Filling stations where they can bring.
Yeah.
their own
Yeah, we'll still have it in the back. We're still gonna put it in the garage once we get back to our, but actually I gotta tell you with the COVID thing, it was kind of nice in the facility where we only had a limited number of people because it was a much more controlled environment. And some of them had to stand outside for a long time, but oops.
But you, as an official at the polling booth, you can't leave the polling booths, so how do you go out and give anybody water?
Oh, I can have water available for them. I don't leave, all these people are inside my facility, we have it over at the fairgrounds. So we literally had 500 people standing in line inside the building.
Inside a building.
Yeah, in color-coded lines, because sometimes when they tell you they're there for a late registrant is easy, because that goes to a different clerk.
Yeah.
But if it's a provisional, but you know, if you get a provisional guy that says, oh yeah, I'm a late registrant, I want to go to the fast line, yeah, now they get a colored card, and so they can't lie to me.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Rita, what do you think of the odds that the roving band of recounting auditors are gonna come to Montana now, once they're done in these other
They already have.
states?
Why would you? Well, they've got some issue in Missoula right now. One of the legislators from Missoula, you know, has targeted Bradley Seaman, who's possibly the best elections administrator in the state of Montana. He is so anal and so detail oriented. And he is just, like, he is who I try to model myself after, and he's just fantastic. But right now, they've gone in and done some counting in his office, and they're insisting that his numbers don't match, and
Who's they?
Representative Tashida and a group of Missoula's voter integrity pact is who has done this. So he gave them some of the envelopes, which they sat at different tables, according to Bradley, and you guys counted some, and you guys counted some, and then you guys counted some, and then they left and they compiled all their numbers together, and they've come to the conclusion that there's 5,000 or 6,000 ballots missing. Now, all of Bradley's reporting says there's nothing missing, and so they want a secrecy envelopes because they want to count those. Well, once the election is over and sealed, it's sealed, and the only way you get it back open is by a district court judge telling you to reopen the election. You don't just cut the seals off of the ballot boxes. And so they're saying, if you don't have anything to hide, then give them to us. And he's saying, I don't have anything to hide, but you need a court order. And so that's where now the fight is, and it was on the news tonight. So, yeah, I can tell you in Cascade County, we have a practice on election day that we cannot do anymore just because of what's happened to Bradley. So when a ballot comes in that's not in a secrecy envelope, we have to place it in a secrecy envelope. Because you can't, you know, we separate everything in stacks of 25. So when our judges go to count, they actually get a packet of 25 pink envelopes, and they're all rubber banded, and that's how we track every day and run our end counts. And so, but on election day, when the 5,000 ballots come in, if something's not in the secrecy envelope, we've actually recycled envelopes from our back end, you know, the empty ones that have been open, and rather than putting them in brand new envelopes, because they're literally, I'm gonna put it in and I'm gonna give it to my count board and they're gonna take it out again. Well, our pink envelopes wouldn't match because we've always recycled on the last day. So I told Lynn, I'm like, oh, we can't do that anymore. We're gonna need a brand new envelope for that hour in time that goes from my verifying a signature to the judges removing it and flattening it, so.
More money.
More money, it's always about the money, yep, yes.
Did I miss something here? Senate Bill 350, related to minor parties?
Oh, yeah, you didn't miss it. I honestly don't know how I don't understand how the bill reads. So it's kind of to stop what happened a couple of years ago with the Green Party, but it's got some convoluted language. Let me look for it for you, because it's really some strange language. It's something about if they don't get enough signatures, they can still vote to put a name on the ballot, but the elections administrator doesn't necessarily have to. And so I really didn't want to talk about that one because oh, here it is. So it says, hold on, let me get to the page that we're still all in discussion with across our association. Okay, so it says, after certification, oh, no, this isn't the right one. No, I would have to get back to you on that one, because like I said, the language is kind of strange on it, and so I'm not 100% sure that they can't put somebody on the ballot regardless of the petition process. I've been on in district court several times over these petitions. And I have to tell you, it's really nerve-wracking. And it's always the same story. Oh, it was in Montana, and we had to collect all these signatures, and it was cold, and honestly, this was the testimony, and it's like, really? Like, you knew you wanted to get your candidate on the ballot, and the reason that they have to have, so like the Libertarian Party don't have to gather signatures where the Green Party does, is because the Libertarians have a bigger percentage during the election, and if they have a certain percentage of voters that voted in the last election, they don't have to collect signatures. But the Green Party never gets that far, so they've always got to gather signatures to get their candidates on the ballot, and as a general rule, their petitions are always turned in late, over and over again, and it's the same story about, not, the weather's cold, and honestly, this could give the girl's testimony verbatim, I swear. But when you're sitting in district court and the judge is running you through the ringer on that, and then they start questioning your ability to verify signatures on the petition, and my first time in district court was over the 143, keep the elk alive and free, vote for 143, because they wanted to get rid of the elk farms, and we had 2,500 signatures that were clearly fraudulent. And the thing went on the ballot anyway, but they were in alphabetical order. It had a backward slant. It was a left-hander that did them. I verified with several of the people that worked at the county that they didn't file their, that they didn't sign the petition. And the judge says, well, are you a handwriting expert? And I said, well, yes, I think I am a handwriting expert. And he says, well, how do you know? I said, well, we've taken classes, and I look at like 1 million signatures so far, so I think I am. But even a blind person could see that these are all the same handwriting. Well, apparently my testimony wasn't good enough, because that went on the ballot, and the elk are alive and free, and the game farms all went down in flames. So overnight, those little businesses were gone. Yes?
Has our Secretary of State lost any power?
Well, I don't think so. She wants to know if the Secretary of State has lost any power.
There was a talk, I don't know if it's in our state or Texas, where the governor is assuming some of the power.
Oh, no, not here in Montana, not yet. Yeah.
Let's give Rina a big hand.